My name is Eliza, I'm 21 years old, and right now my hands are still trembling as I tell you this. I never thought one decision would haunt me for the rest of my life, but it did. I was just a girl trying to protect myself, and yet that choice changed everything. My stepmother gave me a cup of tea that smelled faintly of metal, and in one impulsive second, I swapped cups with my stepbrother. 30 minutes later, he fell to the ground, and my life was never the same again. I grew up in a house that never felt like mine. It wasn't the walls or the furniture, not even the faded photographs of a family that looked whole on the outside. It was the air, the way it carried unspoken rules, sharp edges you learned to avoid if you wanted to survive another day without conflict. My father remarried when I was 13, too young to understand the fine print of blending families but old enough to notice how quickly things shifted once she moved in. Her name was Miriam. My stepmother. She had this aura about her that seemed charming when others were around, polished like the silver spoons she insisted on keeping spotless. But when the house was quiet, her mask slipped. She would study me with eyes that measured instead of loved, weigh my words as if deciding whether they had value or not. And more often than not, she decided they didn't. At first, I told myself it was me. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough, maybe I wasn't the daughter she wanted, maybe blending into her world required patience. My stepbrother, Daniel, seemed to glide through it all without resistance. He was a year older, effortlessly likable, and she adored him with the kind of love that dripped off her in thick, sugary tones. I envied him, even when I didn't want to. But envy is easier to carry than suspicion. And suspicion grew in me like ivy, creeping into my thoughts, curling around every interaction I had with her. There were nights I'd lie awake, hearing footsteps outside my door, the floorboards sighing under her weight. I never saw her enter, but I knew she lingered, her presence pressing against the thin wooden barrier between us. I remember one winter morning when she handed me a cup of tea before school. The steam curled up in delicate ribbons, but beneath the sweetness of honey was something else. Something sharp. I stared at her, and she smiled too quickly, her lips stretched in a way that told me it wasn't kindness, it was control. I set the cup down untouched, muttering something about being late, and the way her eyes followed me out the door made my skin crawl. Years passed like that, a silent game of cat and mouse where I was never sure if I was the prey or just paranoid. My father never noticed. Or maybe he chose not to. He was consumed by work, always on the phone, always promising he'd make more time for us once things settled down. They never did. And so it was just me, Miriam, and Daniel, locked in a house where love was lopsided and suspicion became my shadow. The day it happened wasn't special at first. It was a Sunday, gray clouds pressing against the windows, the kind of day where the air itself felt heavy. Miriam brewed tea, the scent drifting through the kitchen, familiar yet unsettling. Daniel sat at the table, tapping his fingers against the wood, humming something tuneless. I sat across from him, pretending to read a book, though my eyes barely tracked the words. When she placed the cups in front of us, I felt it again, that metallic tang threading through the steam, too sharp to ignore. My throat tightened. My palms went damp. She stood there, watching, her gaze flicking between us like a silent command to drink. And in that moment, something inside me broke free from years of hesitation. My hand moved on its own, sliding my cup toward Daniel and pulling his toward me. He barely noticed, too distracted, too trusting. The seconds stretched as he lifted the cup, the porcelain delicate in his hands. I wanted to scream, to stop him, but my body stayed frozen. Then he drank. 30 minutes later, his laughter cut short, his body convulsed, and the sound of his cup shattering on the floor split the room wide open. His body hit the floor with a dull thud that still rattles in my bones whenever I think back to it. I remember how quickly the warmth drained from the room, how silence roared louder than any scream could. Daniel's limbs jerked unnaturally, his face contorted, lips turning a shade I had only ever seen on spoiled fruit. My breath caught in my throat, the book I'd been pretending to read slipping from my lap and hitting the floor. For a second, I was suspended in disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. Not in the middle of our kitchen, where just moments ago, life had been ordinary. Then Miriam's voice sliced through the air, sharp but controlled. "Daniel," she cried, rushing toward him, her hands fluttering over his body like broken wings. But there was something wrong in her tone, too measured, too rehearsed, like she had been preparing for this exact moment. I stood frozen, my back pressed against the chair, my fingers gripping its edge so tightly I thought the wood would splinter. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat screaming a truth I didn't want to face. I had switched the cups. I had chosen myself over him. And now he was paying the price. Miriam pressed her hand against his chest, then his wrist, then leaned in close to his mouth. I expected panic, a mother's desperation to save her son. But what I saw instead was calculation. Her eyes flickered, darting to the spilled tea on the floor, then to me. It was only a glance, but in that glance, I felt the full weight of her suspicion. "Call an ambulance," she barked, her voice snapping me out of paralysis. I fumbled for the phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed, my voice breaking as I told the operator what had happened. The words "he collapsed" and "not breathing properly" came out like jagged stones, choking me as I said them. The operator's calm instructions sounded distant, muffled by the blood rushing in my ears. Minutes stretched into lifetimes before the sirens wailed outside. Paramedics stormed the house, their movements swift and precise, their voices layered over each other as they tried to stabilize him. I hovered near the doorway, unable to step closer, my body rooted by guilt. Miriam hovered too, her hands clutched together, her face twisted in a mask of horror. But her eyes, those eyes that had always measured me, held something I couldn't name. Not grief. Not fear. Something colder. They carried Daniel out on a stretcher, his body limp, tubes and wires already invading his skin. The front door closed behind them, and just like that, the house was silent again. Miriam turned to me, her breathing heavy, her face damp with staged tears. "What happened?" she demanded, her voice trembling just enough to sound believable. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I explain? That I'd smelled something strange? That my instinct screamed not to drink? That I'd saved myself by damning him? The truth would trap me, tie me to guilt I wasn't ready to confess. So I stayed silent, my lips pressed together until she looked away. The hours that followed blurred together. My father arrived at the hospital later that night, frantic, his face aged 10 years in a single evening. He kept asking questions no one could answer: what caused it, why his son collapsed, whether he would survive. Miriam played the role of the grieving wife perfectly, clinging to his arm, whispering reassurances through her crocodile tears. I sat apart, quiet, my guilt curling around me like chains. When the doctors finally spoke, their words hit like hammer blows. Daniel was alive but unstable, his body fighting something they couldn't yet identify. They ran tests, talked of toxins, of something foreign in his system. The metallic scent of that tea filled my memory, and I knew. I knew what they would find. I just didn't know how to prove it without shattering everything. That night, while my father paced the hospital corridors and Miriam clung to him, I slipped away. I needed answers. I needed to know what she had given us. My feet carried me back to the house, every step fueled by a mix of dread and determination. The kitchen still reeked of spilled tea, its dark stains spreading across the floor like a wound. I crouched down, touching the cold porcelain shards scattered across the tiles. My hands shook as I searched the cupboards. Jars of herbs lined the shelves, labeled neatly in her sharp handwriting. But behind them, hidden in the shadows, I found a small vial. Its glass was dark, its liquid thicker than water, shimmering faintly under the light. I uncorked it, and the metallic stench slammed into me so hard I gagged. It was the same smell. The same taste of iron that had lingered in the steam of my cup. My stomach twisted. She had meant for me to drink it. The truth clawed at me, ripping through the last threads of denial I had left. Miriam wasn't careless. She wasn't misguided. She was deliberate. And if I hadn't switched cups, if I hadn't listened to that screaming voice inside me, I would have been the one lying in that hospital bed. I sank to the floor, my back against the cabinet, the vial still clutched in my hand. Tears blurred my vision, hot and relentless. The guilt crushed me, Daniel suffering in my place, my silence feeding Miriam's game. But beneath the guilt was something else. A spark. Anger. Resolve. If she wanted me gone, she would have to try harder. That night marked the end of who I had been, the quiet girl who swallowed suspicion and tried to fit in. From that moment on, survival wasn't passive. It was war. I barely slept that night. I stayed on the kitchen floor until the shadows of dawn crept through the curtains, my mind replaying every second in agonizing detail. Daniel's laughter, his hand lifting the cup, the sound of it shattering against the tiles. The way Miriam's eyes had met mine, cold, cutting, accusing. I should have told someone. I should have walked straight into the hospital with the vial clutched in my fist, demanding the doctors test it, screaming the truth until someone believed me. But fear rooted me in silence. Miriam was clever. She had charmed my father, convinced the neighbors, wrapped herself in a cloak of respectability so tight no one would dare question her. What was I? Just the awkward stepdaughter, the quiet one with too many shadows in her eyes. If I spoke, she would twist my words, make me out to be unhinged. I could see it already. So I hid the vial. I wrapped it in an old scarf and shoved it deep inside my backpack, as if burying it could also bury the weight of my decision. But nothing could. Not really. When I returned to the hospital later that morning, the world had shifted. My father was slumped in a chair, his face gray with exhaustion, his hand gripping Miriam's like a lifeline. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, her expression a mask of fragile sorrow. But when she saw me, her gaze sharpened, slicing through me like a blade. She knew. She didn't need proof or words, she knew I had seen too much. "How are you holding up?" my father asked me, his voice cracked with worry. I forced a smile, nodding, but the lump in my throat made it hard to breathe. He didn't notice. He never did. He only saw what Miriam wanted him to see. I slipped into Daniel's room, my footsteps soft against the linoleum. Machines beeped steadily, their glow casting pale light over his still face. He looked so fragile lying there, tubes tethered to him, his chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. My heart clenched. This was supposed to be me. My blood should have been poisoned, my body fighting for life. I wanted to tell him I was sorry, that I hadn't meant for any of it to happen, but the words felt useless against the steady hum of machines. I sat beside him, my fingers brushing his hand. He didn't stir. Tears burned my eyes again, but I blinked them back, swallowing hard. Guilt was eating me alive, but beneath it, I felt the fire again. The spark from last night. Miriam wanted me gone, and she had failed. That meant she would try again. The realization settled heavy in my chest. I couldn't just sit here, waiting for her next move. I had to be ready. I had to find proof she couldn't deny, something so solid even she couldn't twist it. But to do that, I would have to get closer to her than ever before. When I stepped back into the hallway, Miriam was waiting. She leaned against the wall, her arms crossed, her face softened into something almost maternal. But her eyes gave her away. "You look tired," she murmured, brushing imaginary dust from my sleeve. The gesture made my skin crawl. "This has been difficult for all of us." I forced myself to meet her gaze, though every instinct screamed to look away. "He'll get better," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her lips curved, but it wasn't a smile. It was a warning. "Yes. He will. But you should be careful, Eliza. Stress can do terrible things to a person. It eats you from the inside out." The air between us thickened, heavy with words unsaid. I nodded stiffly, stepping past her, my pulse hammering in my ears. She was telling me she knew. She was reminding me that in this game, she held the power. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that her warning didn't scare me into silence. It ignited me. That night, as I lay awake in the stiff hospital cot my father had arranged for me, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't wait for her to strike again. I wouldn't let her corner me into guilt and fear. I would find out who Miriam really was, what she had done to Daniel, and what she had planned for me. And when I did, I would tear the mask from her face for everyone to see. That was the moment I stopped being her prey. That was the moment the hunt began. The hospital became a second home in those first days after Daniel collapsed. I learned the rhythm of its corridors, the squeak of rubber saws, the hum of fluorescent lights, the stale smell of coffee clinging to every waiting room. My father barely left Daniel's side, his exhaustion visible in the sag of his shoulders. And Miriam, oh, Miriam, she played her role flawlessly. She wept at the right times, comforted him with a steady hand, charmed the nurses with quiet gratitude. To anyone else, she was the picture of a devoted wife and mother. But I knew better. I had seen the vial. I had smelled the poison. Every time her hand lingered on my father's arm, every time she pressed her lips into a trembling line, I wanted to scream, "She's lying. She's the reason he's here." But the words stayed caged inside me, locked behind the certainty that no one would believe me. So I watched. I listened. I memorized. Late one night, while my father snored in a stiff-backed chair, Miriam slipped out of Daniel's room. I followed her. My heart thudded against my ribs, each beat threatening to give me away. She moved down the hallway with purpose, her heels clicking against the tiles, until she turned into a small alcove near the vending machines. There, I saw her pull out her phone and speak in a hushed tone. I couldn't hear every word, but fragments reached me, carried by the sterile air. "Didn't work, no, she didn't drink it, yes, I'll try again." My blood ran cold. The confirmation I needed, spoken in the dark where she thought no one was listening. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath until my lungs ached. When she slipped the phone back into her purse and smoothed her hair, she looked almost radiant, like a woman at peace with her sins. I crept back to Daniel's room before she returned, forcing myself into the stiff chair beside him. My hands trembled so badly I had to clench them together in my lap. I wanted to wake my father, to shake him until he opened his eyes to the truth. But then I saw the way he stirred when Miriam entered, the way relief washed over his face at her presence, and I knew. He wasn't ready. Not yet. The next morning, I went home alone. Miriam had insisted on staying with Daniel while my father showered and changed clothes, and I volunteered to grab things from the house. The moment I stepped inside, dread curled in my stomach. The kitchen felt different, colder, as if the walls themselves remembered what had happened. I headed straight for her cupboards. My fingers skimmed over the jars, searching for more evidence, something undeniable. But the shelves were spotless, too spotless. She had cleaned everything, removed any trace of what I'd seen. Panic gripped me until I remembered the vial tucked in my backpack. The one piece of proof she hadn't taken. I pulled it out and held it to the light. The liquid inside caught the sun, shimmering with a sickly sheen. It was real. Tangible. Evidence. But evidence meant nothing if I didn't know what it was. I needed help. Someone outside this house. Someone who could name it. So I slipped the vial into my pocket and walked out the door, each step heavy with purpose. The library became my sanctuary. I scoured old medical texts, books on toxicology, even online forums where people whispered about dangerous herbs and household poisons. Hours turned into days, but I found nothing that matched the strange metallic stench. Frustration gnawed at me, but I refused to give up. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, I caught sight of an older man tucked into a corner of the library. His table was stacked with chemistry journals, and his hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages. On impulse, I approached him, my heart pounding. "Excuse me," I whispered. He looked up, his eyes sharp behind thick glasses. "Do you know anything about poisons?" His brow furrowed. For a long moment, he studied me, as though deciding whether I was serious. Then he leaned back and said quietly, "Why do you ask?" I pulled the vial from my pocket, holding it carefully between my fingers. Because I think someone I know is using this. His eyes widened. He gestured for me to sit. That was how I met Professor Alden, a retired toxicologist who spent his days buried in books no one else cared to read. He examined the vial with delicate precision, uncorked it, and sniffed. His expression darkened immediately. "This is no simple poison," he said, his voice low. "This is a compound I've only read about. It's derived from plants rarely found outside of specialized circles. Highly toxic. Metallic scent, bitter taste. Even a small amount can shut down organs within hours." My stomach turned. He glanced at me, his expression cautious. "Where did you get this?" I hesitated. Telling him the truth felt dangerous, but lying would get me nowhere. So I told him everything, my words tumbling out in a rush, the tea, the collapse, Miriam's watchful eyes. He listened, his face unreadable. When I finished, he leaned forward. "You can't keep this to yourself. You need to go to the police." "I can't," I whispered, shaking my head. "She'll twist it. My father, he trusts her completely. If I accuse her without proof, he'll think I'm losing my mind." "Then gather more," he said simply, pushing the vial back toward me. "But be careful. If she suspects you know, she won't hesitate." His words echoed in me all the way home. Be careful. She won't hesitate. When I returned to the hospital that night, Miriam was waiting at the entrance. She smiled as if she'd been expecting me, her hand resting lightly on my father's arm. "Eliza," she said sweetly, "we were just talking about you. You've been spending so much time away lately. Everything all right?" Her tone was light, but her eyes burned into me, daring me to falter. I forced a smile, nodding. "Just schoolwork. The library." She tilted her head, studying me the way a predator studies prey. Then she leaned in, her breath warm against my ear. "Be careful wandering off. You never know what you might stumble into." My skin prickled. She knew. That night, lying on the cot beside Daniel's bed, I realized there was no turning back. I had started down this path, and it would only end one of two ways, with me exposing her, or with her succeeding in finishing what she started. And as I listened to the machines beeping beside Daniel, his life hanging by a thread, I made another promise. I wouldn't let her win. Not this time. Not ever. The days blurred into one another, each one stitched together by hospital visits, hushed conversations, and the steady beep of machines keeping Daniel tethered to life. My father lived in a fog of exhaustion, dividing his time between work and sitting vigil by his son's bed. Miriam remained his anchor, or at least that's what he believed. To him, she was tireless, comforting the nurses, speaking softly to the doctors, ensuring every detail was managed. To the outside world, she was a saint. To me, she was a shadow pressing closer every day. Every time her eyes met mine, I felt her probing me, testing the cracks in my armor. She was waiting for me to falter, to reveal what I knew. And though I fought to keep my face unreadable, the truth burned in my chest like a brand. I couldn't let it show. Not yet. At night, I returned to the house alone. Miriam insisted on staying at the hospital, claiming Daniel needed her more than anyone. My father agreed. That left me wandering the empty halls of a home that had never felt like mine, searching for fragments of evidence I might have missed. One evening, I discovered something. In the back of Miriam's closet, hidden beneath layers of folded scarves, I found a notebook. Its cover was worn, its pages filled with neat, slanted handwriting. My hand shook as I flipped through it, the words blurring before my eyes. At first, it looked like recipes, lists of herbs, instructions for boiling and steeping. But as I read further, the truth uncoiled like a serpent. The entries weren't recipes. They were experiments. Notes on combinations of plants and minerals, meticulous records of doses and their effects. Some pages described outcomes in disturbing detail: weakness, seizures, failure of organs. At the bottom of one page was a phrase that made my blood run cold, effective within 30 minutes. I slammed the notebook shut, my pulse racing. It was her. This was proof. But proof meant nothing if it disappeared, and Miriam was meticulous. If she realized it was missing, she would know immediately who had taken it. I slid the notebook into my backpack, burying it beneath my clothes. My heart hammered as I zipped it shut, the sound impossibly loud in the silent room. For a moment I thought I heard footsteps in the hall, and I froze, holding my breath. But when I peeked out, the house was still. Back at the hospital, I hid the notebook beneath the cot where I slept. The secret pressed down on me like a weight, heavier than guilt, heavier than fear. I couldn't stop thinking about Daniel, his pale face, his still hands, his body fighting a battle he hadn't chosen. He had taken the cup meant for me. And now it was my responsibility to make sure Miriam didn't win. The next day, I returned to Professor Alden. His eyes widened as he flipped through the notebook, his lips tightening with each page. "This is dangerous," he whispered. "These aren't just poisons. These are trials. Someone has been testing, refining. This is the work of obsession." He looked at me, his expression grave. "You need to take this to the police." "I can't," I whispered again, though the words tasted weaker this time. "If I go now, without Daniel awake to confirm anything, she'll turn it on me. She'll say I forged it. She'll destroy me." His gaze softened, but his voice remained steady. "Then you need to be careful. Keep this safe. And whatever you do, don't let her know you have it." I nodded, but my chest felt hollow. Keeping it safe was one thing. Surviving long enough to use it was another. That night, Miriam cornered me. I was standing outside Daniel's room, my arms wrapped around myself, when she appeared at my side. Her perfume was sharp, cloying, the kind that lingered long after she left. She leaned close, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've been busy lately," she said. "So many late nights. So many little errands. Tell me, Eliza, what are you looking for?" My heart lurched, but I forced my face into neutrality. "Just schoolwork," I murmured, my voice steady despite the terror gnawing at me. She smiled faintly, her hand brushing my arm. The touch burned. "You should rest. You look so tired. Stress can do terrible things." The words were the same as before, but this time they carried an edge sharper than a knife. A promise, not a warning. When she walked away, my knees nearly buckled. She knew. She didn't know what I had, not yet, but she knew I was searching. The hunt had become mutual. I barely slept that night, clutching the notebook against my chest beneath the thin hospital blanket. Each sound outside the door made me flinch. I imagined her footsteps, her hand on the handle, her smile as she pulled the truth from me. But she didn't come. Not that night. The next morning, something changed. Daniel stirred. It was small, his fingers twitching, his eyelids fluttering, but it was enough to make my father weep openly, his relief spilling over in grateful sobs. The doctors rushed in, speaking of progress, of possibilities, of hope. Miriam stood by the bed, tears streaming down her face. But when her eyes flicked to me, the mask slipped. For a fraction of a second, I saw it, the flicker of panic, the realization that her plan was unraveling. Daniel was coming back. And if he remembered anything, she would be exposed. The game had shifted. That night, as the hospital quieted and my father finally allowed himself to rest, I sat beside Daniel's bed, whispering to him even though his eyes remained closed. "You're not alone," I murmured. "I know what she did. And I won't let her hurt you again. I promise." My hand curled around his, and for the first time in days, I felt something shift inside me, not just fear, not just guilt, but strength. The kind of strength born from desperation, from love, from the refusal to be silenced. Miriam thought she had me cornered. But the truth was, she was the one running out of time. And I would be ready. The night Daniel finally woke, the air in the hospital felt electric, charged with a tension I couldn't name. I had dozed off in the chair, my head resting against the mattress, when I felt his fingers twitch against mine. At first, I thought I was dreaming. But then I heard it, a faint, hoarse whisper. "Eliza." I shot upright, my heart leaping to my throat. His eyes were open, unfocused but alive, scanning the room like a man clawing his way back from the edge. "Daniel," I breathed, tears spilling before I could stop them. "You're here. You're really here." His lips trembled, the words rasping out broken and fragile. It tasted wrong. My chest constricted. He remembered. Not everything, not yet, but enough. Enough to know. I leaned closer, pressing his hand tightly between mine. "I know," I whispered fiercely. "I know what she did. And you're safe now. I won't let her touch you again." The door creaked. My father stepped in, eyes widening in disbelief before flooding with joy. He rushed to Daniel's side, his voice breaking as he called for the nurses. But behind him, standing just inside the doorway, was Miriam. For once, her mask faltered. Her face froze, the faintest crack of panic flashing across her features before she smoothed it away. She forced a sob, pressing a hand to her chest as if overcome with relief. "Oh, thank God," she murmured, her voice trembling. But her eyes never met Daniel's. They darted to me instead, sharp, calculating. She knew. In the hours that followed, Daniel drifted in and out of consciousness, the doctors celebrating small miracles with every test. My father hovered, radiant with hope, clinging to Miriam's arm as though she had delivered this miracle herself. He couldn't see through her. Not yet. But I could. And she knew it. That night, when the hallway emptied and the hospital fell into silence, Miriam found me alone. She closed the door behind her, her heels clicking softly against the tile. "You've been very persistent," she said, her voice low, steady. "But persistence can be dangerous, Eliza. Do you really think anyone would believe you? You, a bitter stepdaughter, over me?" I didn't flinch. I reached into my bag and pulled out the notebook, setting it on the counter with deliberate calm. Her eyes narrowed, her breath catching just slightly. "I don't need them to believe me," I said quietly. "Because Daniel remembers. And this," I tapped the notebook, "is enough to bury you." For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy between us. Then she laughed. A soft, cold laugh that sent shivers down my spine. "You think you've won," she whispered, stepping closer. "But you don't understand what I've sacrificed. What I've built. Do you think your father could survive without me? Do you think he could even stand, let alone breathe, if I wasn't the one holding him together?" Her face twisted, the angelic facade finally fracturing into something raw and furious. "Everything I've done to protect what's mine." Her words struck like venom, but instead of shrinking, I felt something harden inside me. "Daniel isn't yours to sacrifice," I spat. "Neither am I. And the moment he speaks, you'll lose everything you think you own." For the first time, her composure shattered completely. She lunged, her hand darting toward the notebook, but I was faster. I snatched it back, clutching it to my chest. "It's over, Miriam," I hissed. "You don't get another chance." The door opened. My father stood there, eyes wide, confusion etched across his face. Behind him, Daniel stirred, his voice hoarse but clear enough to cut through the silence. "She gave me the tea." The room froze. My father's gaze snapped between us, between Daniel's pale face, my trembling hands clutching the notebook, and Miriam's mask crumbling into shards. "No," she gasped, tears spilling in a final desperate attempt. "It's not true, I was only trying to help." But my father's expression had changed. The blind trust was gone, replaced by dawning horror. His shoulders sagged as if a weight too heavy to carry had finally crushed him. The nurses rushed in, security called within minutes. Miriam fought, her voice rising into shrieks, but it was useless. The notebook was undeniable, Daniel's testimony irrefutable. By the time they led her away, the woman who once ruled our house with grace and precision was nothing but a fractured shadow. I stood there, shaking, my father's hand gripping my shoulder like he needed me to anchor him. Daniel drifted back into uneasy sleep, but his face was peaceful, lighter somehow, as if he had finally escaped the poison's grip. In the days that followed, the hospital became a place of healing instead of fear. My father apologized endlessly, his guilt pouring out in broken words, but I stopped him every time. You couldn't have known, I told him, even though part of me still ached with anger. Daniel grew stronger. Each day, he spoke more, laughed more, and the boy I thought I had lost returned piece by fragile piece. As for me, I changed. I wasn't the same girl who had once been terrified of shadows in the hallway or the metallic tang of a teacup. I had faced something darker than I ever imagined, and I had survived. One evening, weeks later, I walked through the quiet garden outside the hospital. The air smelled of fresh rain, the flowers glistening under the fading light. For the first time in months, I felt the tension loosen from my chest. I thought of Miriam, not with fear, but with clarity. She had tried to build her world on control, on secrets and poisons. And in the end, it had destroyed her. I had learned something she never could. Real strength wasn't about control. It wasn't about silencing others or clinging to power. Real strength was about standing, trembling and terrified, but refusing to let evil win. And that was something no one could take from me.